Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of our AHI Virtual Speakers Forum. My name is Nick Larigakis, president of the American Hellenic Institute, and it is a pleasure to welcome you all once again to this edition. As always, we are broadcasting from our AHI headquarters here in Washington, D.C. Today's topic is a dark one. It commemorates the 98th anniversary of the Smyrna catastrophe, something that the AHI has always wanted to bring to the forefront and commemorate every year, lest so we never forget that these catastrophes have taken place in the past, and hopefully they stop from continuing becoming the same ones over and over again. Sadly, the tragic events of late summer and early fall of 1922, where countless Greeks of Asia Minor were murdered, occurred during the era of the Armenian genocide and the broader genocidal campaign by the Ottomans against Greeks, Assyrians, and other minority Christian communities. The once robust city of Smyrna, which at the time was a thriving center of Greek culture, was obliterated. The catastrophic events of 1922 are important to commemorate because they remind us of man's inhumanity to man. Unfortunately, we continue to see egregious human rights tragedies and genocides occurring in the world even today, just as they did in Smyrna in 1922. Just take a moment to reflect upon the atrocities that are being committed against Christians in the Middle East almost on a routine basis today, or against the Uyghur in China. Back in 1922, governments stood idle. They failed to act. In pausing for a moment to take time out of our busy schedules to remember Smyrna, we hope we are taking a step to halt this plague of human rights abuses and genocide that still exists, unfortunately, in the 21st century. We are pleased to feature two guest speakers today to commemorate Smyrna. George Mavropoulos, who is the founder of Asia Minor and Pontos Hellenic Research Center in Chicago, and Dr. Constantine Hatzidimitriou, no stranger here to American Hellenic Institute events, a former adjunct professor of Byzantine and modern Greek studies at CUNY Queens College. And today we will have a guest moderator once again, and that will be our very own board of directors member, James Marketos, who traces his family roots to Smyrna. A little bit about Jim, and I will pass it off to him after I introduce him. Jim is a partner with the Washington, D.C. law firm of Berliner, Corcoran, and Rowe, a member of the New York and District of Columbia bars. He specializes in corporate litigation, representing private clients in state and federal courts throughout the United States. He received his bachelor's degree from Princeton University and his Juris Doctorate degree from New York University, where he was also the co-editor-in-chief of the Annual Survey of American Law and was awarded the law school's Vanderbilt Medal. And from 1997 to 2008, Jim also served as chairman of the American Hellenic Institute. It's a great honor for me to introduce Jim and to give him now the program to take us through this presentation here today. And I look forward to coming back towards the end for some closing comments. So Jim, it's all yours.
Thank you, Nick. I have a few introductory remarks and then I'll turn to the speakers. In 1948, the 3-year-old United Nations adopted a convention on the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide. It's still in force. Article 2 says, in the present convention, and I'm quoting now, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. And here are the acts: killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. That's the end of the quote from Article 2. I'm sure I don't need to inform this audience about the events in Smyrna 98 years ago that we commemorate today. The testimonies of what happened there are incontrovertible. It's also incontrovertible that those events meet the UN's definition of genocide. Of course, the UN Convention of 1948 didn't exist in 1922. And in 1922, the term genocide itself also didn't exist. These factors provide a fig leaf of coverage to those who want to deny that what happened in Smyrna in 1922 amounted to genocide. But reasonable people, knowledgeable people, humanitarian people easily see past the fig leaf. They see the truth. They know it was genocide, and they know the deniers are perpetrating a lie. That's why we're here today. We're here not merely to honor the past, that is, the memory of those who perished and suffered in the final episode of what was the extinction of Christian Hellenism in Asia Minor. That we solemnly do. But we are also here to deal with the present, that is, to correct the historical record. We will never forget what happened in Smyrna, nor will we cease reminding ourselves and the world that it was a genocide. Until Turkey acknowledges this undeniable reality, then by the most ordinary standards of simple humanitarianism, we and the world will remain justifiably outraged. Well, as Nick indicated, we have two eminent speakers to help us mark our commemoration this year. I'll introduce each one of them in turn with a brief bio. Following their remarks, we'll have a period of Q&A. If you have a question, use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. First up is Dr. Constantine Hatzidimitriou. We're pleased to welcome him back to AHI to address us today. His doctorate from Columbia University is in Byzantine, Ottoman, and Modern Greek history. He was a Gennadius Fellow at the American School of Classical Studies in Athens, educational counselor of the U.S. Consulate in Thessaloniki, and a professor and administrator at Anatolia College. He's taught at various universities in the New York City area, most recently at Queens College's Center for Byzantine and Modern Greek Studies. A prolific author, his books include American Accounts Documenting the Destruction of Smyrna in 1922. His many other studies have appeared in scholarly journals and book chapters, such as his supplementary study on Turkish responsibility for the Smyrna fire and the American cover-up, which was published in 2012. Currently, he's concerned with updating his book on American involvement in the Greek Revolution and is engaged in a long-term study of Byzantine Central Greece. Dr. Hatzidimitriou, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you, AHI, for inviting me back. Hopefully, I can share my screen, and you will see the PowerPoint. Let's see. That should be it. Good. Okay. So hopefully this will work. I've been to AHI in person in the past. I'm speaking to everyone from Astoria, Queens, my home, and I expect to be very brief and give you highlights. Last time I spoke for over an hour on the subject. So I've got 15 minutes, and all I can do in 15 minutes is basically give you some highlights. As Jim mentioned, my focus has been with the American documents, which to my mind, and I think I've, after working on it for 3 decades, I've been able to find documents that prove that the Turks burned the city, and that the United States knew that they burned the city, as did the British, and they covered it up. I coined a term, sort of tongue-in-cheek. I call it Smyrna Gate for the cover-up. Hopefully, I'll have enough time to tell you about the documents and show them to you, some of them. For me, the subject is personal. It's personal because my mother was there on the quay when the city was burning. The family is from Budza, which is a suburb of Smyrna. That's my mother at age 2 right there. And the rest of the family, my uncle and my Tia Evangelia, who was 21 at the time, did something very special. In the early 1980s, she gave me her memoir. That's her there on the bottom, Evangelia Chiotakis from Kifisia. And in that memoir, which I published in 1997, she outlined the experience of the family. Among that, I'll only share one item quickly with you. At one point, they were hiding in the basement of a house, and my mother, who was 2 years old, began to cry because she's only 2 years old. And so her own mother, they were there with other families hiding, and their family as well. She went to smother and choke her own child to save the rest of the children. That's how desperate people were at the time. And her godmother grabbed the baby and said, "What are you trying to do? Don't do that." And luckily, she calmed down my mom, and that's why I'm here to tell you the story. If she hadn't succeeded, I wouldn't be here. The reason why I got involved in all of this was because of this family history. And from a child, I always heard the family talk about Catastrophe, the catastrophe. So I said to myself, what are they talking about? So I asked questions. This led to more questions and to my working on the book that I published in 2005. The way I published the book, and it took many years to do, is anytime I would go to Washington, D.C. for a conference or for some other business, I would steal away some time and I would go to the National Archives. And in the National Archives and the Library of Congress and the Naval Archives in Maryland, over time, I would copy documents. And in those days, there was no internet. There were no personal computers. So what I did was, I don't know, you might remember those large clunky video cameras. I hit upon the idea of taking a video camera with me at one point and videotaping documents because they were expensive to copy. Recently, the Smyrna catastrophe has attracted a lot of attention. There are some very fine books. I just wanted to make the viewers aware of it, aware of these books. Paradise Lost by Milton is an excellent book. And what he does is for the very first time, he used the archives for what he calls the Levantines. Those are the foreign residents who lived in Smyrna, sometimes for generations. The Great Fire by Utrecht is very well done for someone who is not a professional historian. He redid a lot of the narrative of my good friend, the late Marjorie Housepian-Dopkin, who in 1966 published the first book about Smyrna. And then there's a volume that appeared by Karatzis, The Genocide of the Ottoman Greeks, which is really practically the Bible. It has what happened here? Okay. It has lots of articles in there about various aspects of the genocide, and it's really a must-read if you're interested in the subject, along with various other volumes that the Pontian Center that you're going to hear more about is published. And I have a detailed assessment from the work that I did in 2005, I followed up on in 2012 and published a very detailed analysis of the documents that as I said, prove that the Turks burned the city. The American government knew about it and covered it up. So the takeaway I want you to take away from this presentation is there's no question now. We have the documents. The Turks can continue to deny anything they like, but we have the documents. They've been published. They were initially secret documents, classified, and over time they became declassified, and they show what happened. The first, the other takeaway that I want you to have is it's all about Turkification. And as my good friend and the esteemed scholar Spiros Vrionis showed, this Turkification of Asia Minor is nothing new. It started in the 11th century. 11th century, folks, Byzantium. And they de-Hellenized and Turkified Asia Minor. The destruction of Smyrna in 1922 is actually its second destruction. Ibn Battuta, a Muslim traveler from Morocco, circa 1332, lets us know, and Briones has this in his fine book, that the city of Smyrna was laid to waste. The Greek population was expelled and destroyed as Muslims were moved in. So 22 was the second and final destruction of a Hellenic Smyrna. Turkification, unfortunately, went on. As I think Nick said at the outset, it's a problem that's still with us. In fact, in 1974, I thought when I was studying Byzantine and Ottoman and Greek history, that all of this was part of the past. And in 1974, guess what? They did it again. In my lifetime, Cyprus was invaded. As you all know, churches were turned into mosques. There was rape, there was pillage, there was destruction, and they remained there to this day. It's part of the same process. It's a continuous process. Very recently, what happened is that, as you know, St. Sophia has been turned back into a mosque, the Hora, a historic Byzantine church as well, and other historic sites, including the Pontos, are constantly threatened. And they've been questioning the whole Treaty of Lausanne. The island of Castellorizo is at risk, and the president of Turkey, Erdogan, has bragged about how they threw the Greeks into the sea and how they'll do it again. Very quickly, this is what Smyrna looked like. It was Turkey's, or the Ottoman Empire, rather, Ottoman Turkey, its second largest city. When the Greeks took over, it swelled to about 300,000. And by the time 1922 occurred, the population had swelled to about 500,000 because of all the refugees that went there. The Greeks, as we know, through the agreement of Sèvres with the great powers, the victors of World War I, were allowed to land in Smyrna. Unfortunately, and we shouldn't hide things, there were incidents of violence, and this people died because after so many years of oppression and murder and massacres, there were elements that wanted to take vengeance. And there was a commission that investigated all of this. What happened was that when the Stergiadis, who was the governor, who was very severe, by the way, and he was not popular among the Greeks because of his severity. He bent over backwards, always to accommodate the Turks, and there were executions because of that, of the murders that took place, and some of the pillaging that took place when the Greeks took over. It's a well-known story. What happened is that the Greek army extended its lines. The Venizelos government fell. The German identified King Constantine was brought back, and Kemal Ataturk was able to rally the Turks. And what they did was they counterattacked, and eventually the Greek front collapsed, and the Greek army withdrew to Smyrna in disorder. Again, there were villages that were burned by the retreating troops. There were atrocities that were committed. But and what you see here on the screen is Horton. Horton is one of the great heroes of this whole catastrophe. He was the American consul in Smyrna at the time. He had been there before the war as well. He was the consul in Athens and in Thessaloniki, and had many, many years of experience, spoke a whole lot of languages, and really knew the area well. And his dispatches were a key source of information for me about what happened. So he actually predicted that there would be a collapse of the Greek front. Am I getting the high sign?
You're getting the 3-minute warning.
Oh boy. Okay. So let me gallop through a lot of these other slides and get to the documents. One thing that I want to point out is the fire started in multiple places. It was set on the 13th up here in the top of the city. There was a Standard Oil refinery, and that Standard Oil refinery survived the fire. It's very important to understand that and by the way, there's no guesswork as to how many people were rescued. This is the document that I published that shows 213,480 souls were evacuated by Jennings, who was a YMCA fellow who seized the initiative, although the evacuation only took place after the fire. Horton had suggested that an evacuation take place actually before the fire, and that information was taken to the Turks, and the Turks refused to allow Greek ships to come in and do this. And Jennings could not have done what he did without the help of a courageous naval officer whose name should be at least as well known as Jennings. His name was Powell, Halsey Powell, who was in charge of the naval force in Smyrna at the time. He went against Admiral Bristol, who was the high commissioner in Constantinople, and he was the one that was anti-Greek, enabled the Turks as much as possible, and was a key person in the cover-up. Okay, so the documents. I have a list here. It's a good thing I made this list last night because I have the documents to show you, but given the shortness of time, I'm not going to be able to show them to you unless I get a chance later on. So we have Merrill was the naval intelligence officer, and he sent a telegram to Washington on the 15th. The fire broke out on the 13th, and on the 15th, he sent the telegram to Washington telling them that the Turks burned the city and that they did it because that was their solution to the minority problem. The Secretary of State Hughes also received a telegram on the same day with similar information. The telegram says that there were multiple sources. So it's not just Merrill, other sources that they received with the same information. Merrill's diary, which we have the entries for 9/14 and 9/16, give more details about what he saw and what the Turks did. Horton sent a report from Athens. He was evacuated when the fire reached the American consulate on 9/27 with many, many details, and that remained secret for a long time until Marjorie Dopkin, after her book came out through the Freedom of Information Act, got it published. There's a very important British document from November 8th, which gives lots of details which illustrate that the British government felt the Turks burned the city, why they burnt the city, and gave lots of details. They asked for the Americans to send them similar information. The Americans didn't send Horton's information. They didn't send anything from the naval intelligence officer and their other sources. What they did was they sent a report by Vice Consul Barnes, who was the Vice Consul under Horton and was pro-Turkish and wanted to cover things up. We have Alan Dulles' notes saying, you know, and Dulles was the head of the Near Eastern desk for the State Department. He even saw Barnes saw them pouring petrol on the steps of the U.S. consulate, and yet in his report he claims that we don't know who burned the city. It's incredible when you read this stuff, folks. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, a very famous senator, he also sent a letter asking the State Department for a response about who burned the city and various other details. The State Department responded to him, so they lied to Congress and said they didn't know. Despite all of this information which they had, they kept it secret, and they responded that it was unclear that each side was blaming the other, and various other things about the good behavior of the Turks. A fellow by the name of Bierstadt, who was in the relief organization, published a book before Horton published his great book. The Bierstadt book was called The Great Betrayal. But when that book was going to come out, which has been reprinted, by the way, by the Pontian Center, and it's full of all kinds of details, the State Department was very worried about it. And Bierstadt, before the book came out, met with the State Department, and he gave them a series of questions, which I found. And what I found in Washington were the internal memos of Dulles and the State Department staff about how they were going to deal with the questions that Bierstadt was asking, and how they were not going to answer certain questions, and how they were going to be careful. All of this is about oil. It's about money. While the Turks were massacring, burning, and pillaging, the United States unfortunately, had economic representatives, some of them in secret. A fellow by the name of Chester was negotiating with Kemal for all kinds of, they're called the Chester concessions. Standard Oil and the oil industry was big in all of this. The Mosul oil fields were up for grabs, and this is why the great powers were also dealing with Kemal. Sound familiar, ladies and gentlemen? The more things change, the more they stay the same. But there were many, I want to emphasize this, there were many, many heroic Americans, in addition to Horton and Jennings and others, who were much better than their government. The people, the individuals were heroic and saved thousands and thousands of lives. Esther Lovejoy, Dr. Esther Lovejoy, at one point, who also wrote a book on her experiences in Smyrna at the time, she coined a term, and she called it unauthorized acts of humanity. Unauthorized acts of humanity, because they were unauthorized, but they did what they could to save people's lives. In one of Horton's dispatches, one of his later dispatches, he makes the statement, and he says that the experience at Smyrna made him ashamed to be a member of the human race. Ashamed to be a member of the human race. Jim, I'm out of time, I guess.
Yeah, let's wrap it up and right away if you can.
This is what these documents look like. This is the aid memoir that I mentioned. This is what they look like, and they all have numbers. See these numbers on the side? They're called index numbers. Let me also say this and wrap up, that our opponents, ladies and gentlemen, are extremely well trained and extremely capable. The Turkish government spends millions and millions of dollars endowing chairs and helping people in Turkish studies. And many Americans and even Greeks go to Turkey now and participate in various studies. One of the most capable opponents is the Professor Emeritus Heath Lowry at Princeton University. He was trained, ladies and gentlemen, by Spiros Vrionis, but was seduced, I would say, to the dark side. His Greek is probably as good or better than mine. He knows the subject matter backwards and forwards. When we write and when we document our point of view in terms of the Christian genocide of Asia Minor, we had better do it professionally, carefully, and with the highest level of scholarship, because that's what our opponents are doing. And if we don't do that, they'll tear our positions apart. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Costa. Thank you also for your important work in this regard. I'll turn now to our next speaker. George Mavropoulos is the founder in 2011 of the Chicago-based Asia Minor and Pontos Hellenic Research Center. He's also served as a member of the Illinois Holocaust and Genocide Commission. A son of Kozani by way of parents from Pontos, he came to this country as a student and holds a bachelor's degree in physics from Roosevelt University and a master's in electrical engineering from the University of Missouri. After 3 decades in nuclear engineering positions at Commonwealth Edison, he continued as a consulting engineer for nuclear power plants. He has devoted his life to promoting awareness among all demographics of how and why genocide exists even today, and to preventing it from recurring. Among his current projects is the development of Lethal Nationalism, a high-quality documentary now airing on the internet about the genocide of Greek and other indigenous Christians at the hands of the Ottoman and nationalist Turks, which we'll hear more about shortly. George, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Marketos, and thank you, AHI and Mr. Larigakis for the invitation. In January of 2011, the Research Center was approved by the IRS as a non-for-profit 501c3. And the work we have done, it is the achievement of the work of the Pontian Greek Society of Chicago, which started in the early 2000s to promote the history of the Hellenes of Asia Minor, especially during the decade of 1913, 1923. Early on, we realized that the history and destruction of Hellenism of Asia Minor was not well known, and that we had a lot of work ahead of us. We also realized the importance of participating with other groups to make our case better known. In 2008, our society organized the first academic conference in Chicago and invited members of our community and the Pan-Pontian Federation of USA and Canada to attend the conference. Among the 5 invited scholars, George Shirinian, director of the Zorian Armenian Institute, was the keynote speaker, who became later on my mentor, whom I owe a lot for his continued support and guidance. Mr. Shirinian spoke of the Armenian genocide, a model for the study of persecuted peoples. During the 2-day conference, we discussed ideas for the systematic preservation, study, and dissemination of information about the history and the fate of the Anatolian Greeks. We also discussed ideas to establish a center for research and documentation of the Great Catastrophe, in addition to establishing a library for historical material and scholarly research. In this conference, we also defined and established a vision and mission and objectives of the research center. Since the first conference in 2008, we continue with more annual conferences by inviting scholars to present original research papers, which we would publish after extensive editing. In May of 2012, we also organized the fourth academic conference, which was actually the first international conference in which we invited Armenian, Assyrian, and Jewish scholars to present papers. The conference was hosted by the Holocaust Museum in Skokie, in Illinois. And in 2015, with the financial support of the Panpontian Federation of USA and Canada, we organized the second international conference in New York. In this slide, we show our research center's major publication. In 2011, before the passing of our mentor, Dr. Harry Psomiadis, he asked us to publish his last book, Fridge of Nansen and the Greek Refugee Crisis, 1922-1924. It was his last major research work, which took him about 5 years to complete while in France and Norway. I would like to add that our publications are available on our website as well as through Amazon. We're happy to state that there is a continuous demand for these historical books. Our current project, the Exodus, will translate from Greek to English the 5 volumes of the Exodus of about 1,000 survivor testimonies, which were originally published in Greek by the Center for Asia Minor Studies in Athens in 1980. Effort is being made to have the publication ready for the Smyrna Centennial in September of 2022. We are currently seeking funding for this critically important project. We are also planning to organize a major scholarly event for the Smyrna catastrophe and the end of Greek presence in Anatolia after September of 1922. This documentary, Lethal Nationalism, Genocide of the Greeks 1913-1923, has been in the making for the last 8 years. It has been a laborious journey and a major project of our research center. It explores the genocide of the Greeks of Asia Minor, Pontos, and Eastern Thrace. Noted scholars and academics from around the world have recognized the genocide of the Christian population of Greeks, Armenians, and Assyrians as the first genocide of the 20th century. Bill Curtis, the legendary television news anchorman, narrates this powerful documentary, which already has garnered multiple film awards in the United States, Greece, Romania, and is now in the running for Best Director and Best Documentary in Australia. Using an international language that is English to reach the masses, we intend not only to reach the Greeks about this tragic story of first genocide of the 20th century, but all people, as this is an unknown international story that many people can relate to if they're exposed to it. The production of this documentary is an effective way to engage and educate those who have never seen or heard about the story, and to debunk those who deny. Images, documents, and testimonies will become harder and harder to deny when the masses get behind it. We have worked extra hard to do the marketing with major media platforms. We're working with Bitmax company, and soon the film will be in its way to Amazon, iTunes, Vudu, and Google Play, with future hopes for creation sites like Netflix and Hulu to also accept this film. And now let us view a short segment of the 80-minute documentary. This portion focuses on the events in Smyrna in September of 1922.
The Ottoman Greek genocide had annihilated the Ottoman Greeks of eastern Thrace and the Aegean coast. Then it crushed the Greeks of Pontos. Now it put a bullseye on the backs of Smyrna's enormous Greek population. On September 9th at 9 a.m., the Turkish nationalists entered the city. Kemal had installed Nurettin Pasha, a notorious Christian hater, as the city's governor. The French consul and the Catholic archbishop both offered an escape plan for Archbishop Chrysostomos, the leader of the Greek Orthodox Church in Smyrna. He declined the offer, saying a shepherd had to stay with his flock. Hours later, a French observer stared as a Turkish lynch mob made Chrysostomos one of the first to fall.
They tore off his beard. They gouged his eyes out. They cut off his nose and ears.
On September 10th, Mustafa Kemal entered the city, taking command of the former Greek army headquarters. 3 days later, after the wind shifted, Kemalist fighters set fire to the city's Armenian quarter, which soon spread to the Greek quarter. The flames never touched the Turkish quarter.
Από τη μια φωτιά στην άλλη, το ένα μέγαρο στο άλλο, από το ένα σπίτι στο άλλο, γεμίσαν τα ρουθούνια σε καπνό. Τα κορίτσια τα βάζανε στα μπαούλα και ούντουσαν μέσα στα σπίτια. Που ούντουσαν Τούρκοι, τα παίρνανε τα κορίτσια. Οι Τούρκοι τα παίρνανε τα κορίτσια και τα χώνανε οι μανάδες μέσα στα μπαούλα να τα γλιτώσουν. Και ούντουσαν μέσα στα σπίτια.
500,000 refugees and Smyrna residents rushed to the seaside docks to escape flames rising 200 feet. The Turks put a machine gun nest at one end. The Christians were trapped.
Μας κυνηγούσαν οι Τούρκοι στην παραλία της Σμύρνης. Φορούσες δαχτυλίδι στο χέρι. Δεν περιμένανε να το βγάλεις. Τάκ με το μαχαίρι σου το κόβανε. Φορούσες κουλαρί και τάκ τα αυτή σου το κόβανε. Και να είναι τα πτώματα 1 μέτρο, να πατάς απάνω στους άλλους για να προχωρείτε. Πώς να προχωρήσει ο κόσμος που βάζανε ζώνη για να διαλένε τα κορίτσια, να διαλένε τα παλικάρια.
An American physician recorded what he saw.
People throwing themselves into the sea to be drowned. The crash of falling buildings. The shots on the docks. Homicidal and suicidal, all combined to make the night one long, horrible, fiendish nightmare.
A reporter for National Geographic wrote,
"Within that multitude, so densely packed that one could not lie down without being crushed to death, women gave birth to stillborn babies and sheltered them against their dried up breasts for lack of a burial place." National Geographic.
Thank you, George, and thank you for your amazing work at the center, and now for this wonderful documentary that your group has put together. While I'm waiting for some questions to come in, I'm going to take the liberty of asking each of you my own question. First for you, Costa, can you give us one key finding that you found among the documents that you've gone through that convinces you about an American cover-up. You gave some examples before, but I'm wondering if you could just drill down on one key one to give us a real feel for how this played out.
Yeah, I mean, the cover-up took place over a long period of time with a large number of people involved. Unfortunately, they even lied to the British because, as I mentioned, the British sent them their documents and asked if the United States had anything similar. And instead of sending them the key documents that they had, they sent them the Barnes report, and that report minimized the loss of life and also hid as much as possible. One item that I didn't get a chance to mention to you that I think needs to be pursued and needs to be better known. When I was in Washington in the archives, at one point, I noticed a folder, because that's what they do, is they have folders and little boxes. And there was one marked household and supplies information from Smyrna consulate. So I thought that that was kind of curious. And I said, well, let me see what that is. Because remember, all of these, what they did was when the consulate was burning, Horton made sure that the consulate archives were loaded onto the American ships. He left his books, his beloved manuscripts, and his personal effects behind, but the archives he had loaded onto the ships. So this box contained many things, but one thing that I saw that really captured my attention, and I published a part of it, is that Barnes, he was promoted to consul because he played ball with the State Department and with Bristol and the cover-up people and the oil lobbyists. What he did was he took over. Remember, the consulate had burned. So what the documents that I found was he sent a report to Washington that the Turks had let the Americans, now this is right after the fire, occupy and create a new consulate in a building that an Armenian supposedly had abandoned. The person probably was either killed or fled for their lives. So the United States government officially, with Turkish compliance, the United States government at the time hadn't even recognized the Kemalist government, took over the property of a murdered or a displaced Christian and turned it into the new consulate. In fact, they bragged about how much better it was than the old consulate that they lost, and how the Turks charged very little rent as compared to the Greeks prior to that. I've mentioned this to Cyrenian, and I mentioned it to Jean Rosilius at AHI. I think the United States government should be sued, or someone should make this known, because it was an appropriation, an illegal appropriation of private property in the middle of this Holocaust. I hope that's what you had in mind.
Yeah, thank you, Gus. This one's for you, George, and I still encourage our audience members to send in some questions for our speakers. We have a little time left. George, about the documentary. I've seen the documentary. I think it's tremendously well done. The production values are very high. I found it to be very even-handed and not hyperbolic. I found it to be factually accurate, and it's going to be an important document in helping the wider world understand what happened in 1922 and in the earlier years, and how what happened in 1922 was the culmination of a genocide against Christians that began actually in the 1800s. But I would like to ask you, there were a lot of Turkish surname scholars interviewed and who speak in the documentary, and I'd like to know how you were able to get so many of them to participate and speak as forthrightly as they did.
Well, Dr. Akşam, for instance, he's no longer in Turkey. He was imprisoned many years back, and then he fled to Germany. Dr. Gosek, she's teaching at the University of here in Michigan, but she's unable to go back to visit her family in Turkey. So we spoke, of course, with Dr. Akşam. He participated in the first, I would say in the second academic conference. We spoke many times about what happened and all these historical facts and documents and so on. So they were willing to be interviewed and to express their position and what they could do for the documentary. So, and what I would like to also mention that in order to do the documentary, we hired a group of people like the narrator, Bill Curtis, from who worked for CBS, along with Mr. John McCarthy, who did the script. What we have done is we gave Mr. McCarthy all the material. We had a number of conversations and answer questions that he had and so on. And it took him many, many months to gather all that information, all these documentation. And at the end, he presented a script of about 110 pages. On each page, there is a reference, or at least one or two or three references of each topic. And so we wanted to produce a documentary that was correct, historically correct, and it was based on a professional work. And I think, as you indicated, I think we have achieved that.
George, how can people see the documentary?
Well, they can, at the present time, the documentary is available through Vimeo. There is a slight charge, a small charge of $5.99 that Vimeo charges. They can go to Lethal Nationalism, Genocide of the Greeks, 1913-1923, and they can view it. We, at this point, we have about 20 individuals from 25 countries that they have seen this documentary, including some from Turkey who posted very positive remarks, comments regarding the documentary.
Very good. How long is the documentary?
It is, it's about 80 minutes, a little over an hour.
And how long did it take you to put it all together?
Well, you know, being a small organization, we did not have the financial support or the money that we needed. So what we did from the beginning, actually from 2008, when we had these scholars at the conferences, we were lucky to work with the production company, On Air Productions, who actually spent or invested so much time to help us out because they recognized the importance of this historical issue. And so what we did is we started interviewing everybody who participated in the conference. So we had quite a bit of material, and then later on, we gathered the photographs, the films, and so on, traveled to Greece, went to Athens, and visited Earth where we spent a couple days to go through the files and so on. So that's why you see the sign of Earth on some of these archival material.
One of our questioners asks for the name of the documentary again. I'll say that it's called Lethal Nationalism. That's the short title, and that's what to be searched for in Vimeo. Another question is coming up about the Turkish scholars. Did they in fact insist or press to be involved, and even at the risk of their lives?
Well, in the documentary, Dr. Aksham and Dr. Gosek talk about it, and they say they feel the need to tell the truth, regardless what the position of their government is, and they're risking their life, and which is true. They're risking their life to tell the truth.
I understand there's also some very rare and previously unseen footage in the documentary. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we went through many archives. We did a number of, for almost 2 years, trying to investigate and see what is available. Some of the sources came from England, where we had to pay $60 per second in order to obtain those segments. So, plus we have our production people reached Japan, France, and so on, some of these artists to do some of the work and improve some of the photos, because unfortunately, although the Armenians had plenty of material, but then after the Armenian genocide, the CUP forbidden anyone to take photos and send them out to Europe, because as you know, if we go back to the newspapers at the time, we'll see so many headlines about the Armenians. But then, as I said, after the 1915, 1916, we were not able to get as much, photographic material and so on. But we were lucky at least to find some from England.
There are no more questions. So Nick, if you'd like to.
Yeah, well, let me just pose something from my own better understanding of this particular issue. Would it seem that the majority of ventures, for lack of a better word, regarding the continuous promotion and awareness, which is very critical to this issue, is it mostly happening from outside of Greece, from like Greeks in the United States and other parts of the world? Is it fair to say that? I have a reason to ask that question.
I would say we are the only ones outside of Greece, the only research center that realized that in order to be successful in disseminating the information or to have the countries and individuals to recognize what happened, we had to do the work in the English language. And there is plenty of material, historical material and so on in Greece, but then it stays within Greece. And we're lucky to have all these scholars, including Dr. Hatzidimitriou, the late Dr. Psomiadis, a network of all these scholars who participated and have been helping in that effort. And Dr. Hatzidimitriou could say of.
Yes, Nick, I have a comment for you. Unfortunately, the issue of the genocide is a divisive issue in Greece. You may recall a number of years ago, there was an outcry because Greek school books were to be purged. And a distorted version of the Catastrophe was going to be disseminated throughout the educational system. Certain Greek academics, who I consider misguided, try to soft pedal the Turkification issue and the atrocities that the Ottoman Empire and modern Turkey have perpetuated over time. They're misguided. They think that if we don't antagonize them, we can get along better. So my feeling is that in the United States, we, with centers like George and individuals like George, and I have to mention Stavros Stavridis in Australia. There are some other scholars in Canada that I'm aware of in the English-speaking world. There are sort of Pirina centers of outcry and people working to get the truth out. And of course, AHI has been in the center of this for a very, very long time. I want to say Eonia Imnini, I think it was in 1995, Harry Psomyadis, Vrionis, Gene Rosidis and I were in Washington and presented, I thought they were members of Congress. Nick, you might recall, and I'm the only one left of the group, but AHI has always promoted the truth. And of course, it's, as I tried to show, it's interrelated to the Cyprus issue and so many of the issues today. And Greek territory is at risk. And make no mistake about it, they did it in '74, and it could happen again. So these elements in Greece, who are the promoters of what I like to call the happy minority school of Ottoman studies and Greek studies, are misguided, and unfortunately, we have to deal with the Turks, but we have them to deal with at the time.
Let me ask then just a follow-up to that. Obviously, the Armenians for many, many years here in the United States had tried to pass a congressional resolution to recognize the Armenian genocide. They were successful recently, but I would argue that were successful. One, of course, they've been systematically doing it for many years and presenting the resolution, and it finally got a vote in their favor. But it also helped, of course, that there's no current flavor for Turkey on Capitol Hill. And that has gone a long way to pass that resolution. Aside from the awareness, which is critically important, and I congratulate George and the center for this exceptional documentary that I just saw snippets of, and I look forward to seeing the entire documentary. And of course, all the great work that you've done, Gus, and the other authors. But I guess short of just continuously raising the awareness, which is very important, is there anything else? I mean, do you feel that there's ever could be an opportunity to be able to get a resolution of this, say, within the Congress? I doubt you will ever get a lawsuit on the U.S. government the way you were describing earlier. I just don't think that's going to happen. But at least to get some kind of formal recognition, by our Congress. Is that, I guess, is there another goal other than just the constant awareness?
I think that the work that AHI does, and if we can, one of the outstanding things that you do and that the Pontian Center does, and it's unique in my experience among local Greek organizations, grassroots organizations, it's that it's built ties both with the Armenians and with the Jewish community. So I think that strategically, one has to make it a human rights and minority issue, a issue of genocide broadly defined, the way Lemkin did at the United Nations many, many years ago. So I think the strategy has to be a united strategy and a strategy that brings others along with us, and that's the way we'll get recognition. I don't think that we should be isolated. Sometimes there's some infighting. The Pontians only want to have the Pontian genocide recognized instead of a broader approach. Sometimes the Armenians only want to include what happened to them and not the Greeks or the Assyrians. Of course, the Jews and the Jewish community has been very, very successful in making the Jewish Holocaust part of the mainstream of higher education and the middle and elementary school level. I think that that's another thing that George did not mention, is that in Chicago, the Pontian Center has actually put together guides, teacher guides, and gotten them into the public education system. That is an outstanding achievement, and that needs to be broadened. If that happens, then the way individuals have come to know better the Jewish Holocaust and the Armenian genocide, that way they can know about our genocide, the Christian genocide, and what happened to us in terms of a broader human rights issue.
Well,
I would like to add that after the recent years that we have worked with the Holocaust Museum, with the Armenian groups here, with ANCA, and so on, the last 2 years ago, I believe, the Armenian resolution included the Greek genocide, and HALC tried to promote that, tried to work, and I think Congressman Larigakis and some others were very influential. So at least we made a step. We were included in that resolution.
well, I do think, though, because you follow this much, much more closely than I do, but what I have gathered over the years is what you were alluding to, Gus. There seems to be a little bit, of friction, some tension between all the various elements at play here. And I think some consensus has to take place in terms of moving forward ultimately. And I think maybe we can all try to use the 100th anniversary in about 2 years from now and try to target that as a potential day to have some kind of an official recognition regarding on Capitol Hill, and of which AHI would be happy to be involved in whatever role we can. But I think it really is incumbent upon people like yourselves to really decide exactly what type of resolution and recognition that we'd like to see presented. And once you do that, I feel confident that we can try to at least get it introduced, get it recognized. It would be difficult, but it's something that I think we can shoot for the 100th anniversary if all parties are in agreement. But for now, we're going to have to leave it at that. Before I just conclude, Jim Marketos, as moderator, do you have any last comments you'd like to offer?
There is no comments, Nick, but there is one last question that came in. Do we have time for it?
Yeah, we do. Go ahead, as long as short responses.
Okay. The question is, how would you compare Erdogan's ideology to the genocidal attitudes of past Turkish governments? Citing things like the pogroms against minorities, the Greeks in Turkey in 1950s and so forth, is the binding ideological thread Turkish nationalism? Either one of you?
Yes, I think Turkish nationalism is certainly something that is a modern phenomenon, a 20th century phenomenon, but within the Turkish ideology of the past, you see the same elements. There is something in the attitude of the Turks towards non-Turks, and particularly Christians, that I tried to illustrate is really historical and goes back before the modern phase. I consider this whole Turkish nationalism, and it's been written about quite a bit, as the latest phase. It's the 20th century phase of the attacks against the Christianity of Anatolia, going back to the Byzantine period. So it's in various stages and phases, and they're all interrelated because it's the same people.
I'd like to add a footnote to that, Costa, and that is relating to this question. I generally agree with you, but Erdogan has brought a new touch to it, and that is his Islamic angle. We remember that Kemal and his colleagues were about Turkey for the Turks, and it was true ethnic nationalism. There was no Islamic element to it. In fact, he tried to suppress that. But Erdogan differs from his predecessors, in my view, in emphasizing the Islamic component to Turkification, if you will.
I couldn't agree more. That's what I was alluding to in terms of the past. You know, one doesn't want to talk religion, but certainly there's that element of jihadist Islam that runs through his ideology and links it to the ideologies of the past.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but unfortunately, and you alluded to it also, Dr. Hatzidimitriou, this is just only a systematic pattern throughout the ages regarding Turkish policy in terms of how it maneuvers. And even as we speak now, just 6-7 nautical miles off the coast of Kostolorizom, you have the Greek Navy and the Turkish Navy bearing down on each other, where Turkey again is acting provocatively, sending out the Greece, a research vessel in what is Greek territorial waters, and tensions are running high once again. And although this NAFTEX is supposed to expire tomorrow, some of my contacts I was speaking with in Greece today feel that the Turks might even extend it once again. So with what they're doing in the Aegean, Eastern Mediterranean, and what they continue to do in Cyprus with the actions of last week, the new strongman who was just quote unquote elected to be the Turkish Cypriot leader in Tartar. We have some issues that we still have on the table that are profound, and we need to be very vigilant regarding these issues because the Turks continue to be provocative, and we need to stop this and engage our policymakers to put some pressure on the Turkish government to cease and desist. We shall see. But for now, we will end it here on this bleak commemoration, but one that is important to commemorate so we don't forget. Next week, join us for another AHI virtual presentation of a little more of a heroic nature. It was catastrophic for a while there, but in the end, it was heroic. And that is, of course, the Greek stand of Orchidea and their great resistance regarding the Nazis and the Axis powers through 4 or 5 years of occupation in Greece. So we will bring you that commemoration next week, but on the Thursday, the 29th at 2 o'clock, everyone will receive the usual invitation shortly, and we'll provide you with those speakers. As always, I'd like to thank our very good staff led by Emily Pontos, who acts as producer for our virtual forums. He does a tremendous job. Of course, our Director of Legislation, Elias Yerasulius, which also helps to provide a lot of the research for many of us in presenting these forums. I want to thank our 2 distinguished speakers today. I think this was an exceptional discussion. I'd like to thank our guest moderator, Jim Marketos, for doing his usual excellent job in moderating and a subject matter that's very dear to his heart. And we thank him for taking the time to do this today. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you once again for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next week for the October 28th event. Until then, wishing all of you a good afternoon, and God bless. Take care.
God bless.